Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. My name's Caitlin Goldberg. I'm the president of the Quinnipiac Film Society. On behalf of the School of Communications and the Quinnipiac Film Society, I want to welcome everyone here this evening and especially welcome our guest, Ted Kotcheff. At the end of last school year, my executive board and I discussed how strongly we wanted to bring more guest speakers to Quinnipiac to inform the community that you can really make it in this industry and to begin establishing a network for students to utilize in years to come. This summer, my director of promotions, Tom Gallo, had the opportunity to meet Ted while interning at Law & Order Special Victims Unit and approached me about bringing Ted to Quinnipiac University. Ever since that initial conversation, we had a constant support and enthusiasm from not only Ted, but the entire School of Communications. Specifically tonight, I want to thank Dean Moore for her extraordinary amount of support in bringing Ted to Quinnipiac throughout the past few months. Without her help and guidance, along with the support of the School of Communications, this event would not have been possible. Angela, Rosa, and Carol, all from the School of Communications, I also want to thank you because they were absolutely amazing in this entire process. A huge thanks also goes out to Rebecca Abbott, the advisor for the Quinnipiac Film Society, and a true advocate for the growth and development of this industry, as well as Liam O'Brien, who is the department head of the Film, Video, and Interactive Media majors, as well as tonight's facilitator. Lastly, I just want to quickly thank my executive board, Jake Friedman, Vice President, Tom Gallo, Director of Promotions, Victoria Hart, Treasurer, and Noah Colombo, Secretary, for all their hard work, dedication leading up to tonight. Furthermore, I also want to just quickly thank my promotions committee at Quinnipiac. All of you did an amazing job in helping to support this event. And lastly, the entire Quinnipiac Film Society that's here tonight, thank you all for coming, and thank you for your enormous amount of support. Before we introduce Ted and bring him up onto stage, we just wanted to quickly give you kind of a little sneak preview of all the different works that he's been working on ever since he entered into this film television world back in the 50s. So thank you, Ted, for coming, and here's a little sneak peek of his work.
John Rambo, a drifter, just passing through their town.
Morning! Headed north or south?
North.
Now jump in. I'll make sure you're heading the right direction, huh?
You got someplace I can eat around here?
There's a diner about 30 miles up the highway.
Is there any law against me getting something here?
Yeah, me. I want you to book this gentleman for vagrancy, resisting arrest, carrying a concealed weapon.
They knew he was innocent.
Starting to dislike you. A lot.
And they didn't give a damn.
That's okay, Warren. Don't worry about the soap. He's tough. Just shave him. Try.
Don't move. I don't want you to cut your own throat.
John Rambo, one man who's been pushed too far.
You're finished! You've gone as far as you're gonna go! Heading straight for the top. Right on top of him. There's no way out of here except through us.
He was hunted. Trapped.
There he is! On the cliff!
And forced to fight back.
Don't push it. Don't push it. I'll give you a war you won't believe.
Teasel, you and all your men couldn't handle him before. Now, what makes you think you can handle him now?
Because God knows what damage he's prepared to do.
You don't seem to want to accept the fact that you're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare.
Are you telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
You send that many, don't forget one thing. A good supply of body bags.
Sylvester Stallone. This time, he's fighting for his life. First blood.
There, I found him. Mr. Lomax.
Bernie, how you doing? Great place.
Hope you don't mind, but we just walked in. We didn't know that you...
Bernie? Shh, shh, he's sleeping. Yeah. Wow. Not even dark out and he's out of his skull.
Well, he's been working awfully hard, you know.
Bern?
Mr. Lomax.
Bernie!
Hey, don't slap him. That's your boss. I know.
He's meditating. No, he's not. He's like dead, man. Come on, let's
All
walk
right,
him around.
yeah, we'll get the blood
Here we go.
circulating and everything.
There we go.
Been eating so
Okay,
well.
this way, Richard.
All right.
Here we go. Come on. That's it. Move those feet, Bernie. That's the boy. There we go.
Get him up.
Up. Throw your weight here, would you? Come on, Bernie. Move those feet.
He's gonna be hurting there.
Oh, losing him. Losing him. Put him on the couch. Put him down.
Can't just leave him like this, you know. Come on, Bert. Come on. Come on.
Get your hand off me, Bernie.
Blaster, Wilkes, Johnson, Charts, Scott, Segal, and Colonel Jason Rhodes. These are the men who trained together, fought together, and survived together. Now, in the most important mission of their lives, they're going back to get their buddies who were left behind.
Are you ready? All right, gentlemen, let's go.
We're totally better right behind this time!
Okay, your history, pal.
I'm gonna take out the tower! Hold on!
Let's go, fly this thing.
Come on, buddy. We're going home.
Why do you think that we go over and over the printouts of a game plan? Because deviating from that plan can cost us a championship. Now, if there's some of you who are not interested in being champions, well, then you laugh. Relax, have a good time, but you'll do it on somebody else's football team. Not mine. The key to being a professional is consistency. And the computer measures that quality. No one of you is as good as that computer. I hope I am understood. Now, everybody on the bus in 10 minutes.
Law and Order Special Victims Unit. This hard-hitting and emotional elite detective force investigate and prosecute sexually oriented crimes.
How could you just leave him there?
I'm afraid. Featuring Golden Globe winner Mariska Hargitay. Law and Order Special Victims Unit.
Ted Kotcheff was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. He attended the University of Toronto majoring in English literature, and upon graduating went to work for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation television service. Within a short time, he started directing live TV drama. At 24 years old, he was the youngest drama director in Canada. In 1957, Ted went to England to expand his directing abilities into theater and film. Towards the end of the 1960s, Ted Kotcheff directed two extraordinary films. The first, Edna, the Inebriate Woman, was produced for BBC and swept all prizes at the 1970 British Emmys, including Best Actress, Best Script, Best Director, and Best Film. In 2000, Edna and the Inebriate Woman was voted one of the 100 greatest British television programs of the 20th century in a poll of industry professionals conducted by the British Film Institute. The second film created towards the end of the 1960s was Wake and Fright, which received an invitation to the 1970s Cannes Film Festival. It received great critical acclaim. In 2009, 39 years after the film was made, Martin Scorsese declared it to be a Cannes classic, and it was showed at the Cannes Film Festival that May. In 1973, Ted returned to Canada and began working on the Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz with Richard Dreyfus and Randy Quaid. The film won an Oscar nomination for Best Script. From there, Ted made a series of popular films ranging from First Blood, the film that defined the Rambo series, to the cult comedy Weekend at Bernie's. He also made such films as Fun with Dick and Jane, starring George Segal and Jane Fonda, Uncommon Valor, featuring Gene Hackman and North Dallas 40, which has been considered one of the greatest American football movies ever made. Ted Kotcheff's work most recently promotes social justice and the fight against racism. For the past 11 seasons, Kotcheff has been executive producer on the top-rated procedural series Law & Order Special Victims Unit. He was involved from the very inception of the series and has guided it through the 200-plus episode 11-year run. It is with great honor that I present Ted Kotcheff.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for pitching up. Dean Moore, thank you for throwing in the bucks along to help that happen. Well, Ted, as you know, looking out at all these people, I'm sure that they have a lot of questions, such as, how in the world do I ever get a job in this business, you know? And I think that kind of, tends to haunt college students, especially in this environment. And so I guess my first question to you is really about toolbox.
Toolbox?
Toolbox, a toolbox, if you will. Because, Ted and I and some other people just went to dinner, and I learned that Ted's background is really quite similar to mine, both English literature majors and coming out of the theater. So it's not just getting a BA or BFA in film, video, or interactive media that is necessarily what you need to have in your toolbox to be successful. And there are probably a lot of personal traits that go into having a successful career, aside from being lucky. And as we look back, certainly for me, I had no idea that I was going to, be in the film business. And I never went to film school, And and maybe that was more generational than anything else. But I just wanted to see what your journey was like of how you got to the point of deciding that, my God, I'm actually pretty good at this.
Well, of course, when I was all your age, there was no such thing as a film school. Never even dreamed of. As Liam just said, I studied English literature, English Lang and Lit at university. And when I came out, I wanted to be a poet. But I didn't have any money, so my father said, look, they're opening up a television service in Toronto. I was a Canadian. The CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, was just starting. He said, why don't you go down and see if you can get a job as a writer? So I went down there, and I was 21. And he said, so I went and saw the program director, and he said, well, have you had any experience in television? I said, well, nobody in Canada has any experience in television. No. So he said, well, have you ever directed? And I said, yeah, when I was at school, I directed a couple of plays at the University of Toronto. Any radio plays? No. So he said, how would you like to learn? I said, sure. So he said, made me a stagehand. So I worked as a stagehand. And the way I got to direct, because I was directing by 24, 3 years later, I was directing live television drama. And there's not many guides for your own lives, but there's two things that perhaps they characterize what happened to me, which may be of use to you. There was a wonderful documentary filmmaker who worked with John Gerson. I think you know who John Gerson is? John Gerson was the great British documentary filmmaker. He had a great documentary, which I always loved, called Night Mail. And he wrote a book about making documentaries. And during the war, he came over to Canada and worked at the National Film Board. And this man, Sidney Newman, had been his protege. He'd been a great documentary filmmaker. And I heard that he was going to do 10 documentaries about new thoughts at the University of Toronto. So this is tip one. I went and offered myself. I said, hey, I just graduated from University of Toronto. I'd love to write these 10 documentaries for you. And he kind of smiled rather patronizingly at me. And but he probably was charmed by my insouciance and my naivete. So he said, all right. And I did all the research. Of course, I supposedly wrote these 10 documentaries, but I didn't write them. I did the research, and I wrote them, and he rewrote every word. And, but he taught me, and he taught me how to write for documentaries. And he said, look, you're saying the same thing as the pictures. No, don't let the words do the same thing as the pictures. The words should do something else from the picture. So you have two things happening at the same time. They work in counterpoint to one another. Okay. So I began to learn. He taught me all sorts of things about writing for documentaries. And we successfully made 10 documentaries together for what was done live television. We did one about insulin, I remember, where the signal broke down and they had to inject these poor mice with insulin. And they all died, and we had to inject more. Never mind, it's a long story. Because, you know, insulin was discovered by 2 doctors from Toronto. And then, as only can happen in a big bureaucratic organization, the drama department had no leader. He had resigned, and it was rudderless for about 3-4 months. So they get this documentary filmmaker and say, would you like to run the drama department? So Sydney was a bit lacking confidence about this because he knew nothing about drama. And because he thought I had studied English literature, he said, Ted, would you like to be my story editor? I'm 23. And I said, sure. So I went to the drama department, and for a year, it was the greatest training because we had 2 series. In those days of live television, remember, they had single sponsors. They had the Chase and Sanborn. We had the Chase and Sanborn Hour, and we had General Motors Theater. And the directors, it was great training. The directors would come and say, Ted, I'm 10 minutes short. I said, okay. So I stayed up all night long and write 10 minutes and give it to them. Or 10 minutes over. So then I'd stay up all night cutting and trimming the thing. So it was great training in shaping scripts for broadcast. One day, Sydney Newman comes into my office where I was, as I'd been working for 1 year as a so-called story editor. Oh, by the way, it was interesting. When I arrived at the office, there were 1,000 unsolicited scripts, over 1,000 unsolicited scripts sitting that no one had ever read. So I had devised this brilliant scheme. I paid 4 readers $10 for a no and $5 for a yes. Wait a minute. Or was it the other way around? Sorry, $10 for a yes and $5 for a no. Encouraging people to be generous and not just say no right off the bat, you know. And we dealt with this. Of all those over 1,000 scripts, unsolicited scripts, I only used 1, finally. But anyway, one day after doing this job for 1 year, Sidney Newman walks to my office and he says, you know, Ted, you're a pretty good writer. Not a great writer, but a pretty good one. He said, but know what you'd be great at? I said, no, what would I be great at, Sidney? He said, you'd make a wonderful director. I've never known to this day on what he based this judgment on, but he thought I'd make a terrific director. And so he says, here's the deal. I'm going to let you direct 1 play for us. If it's good and I like it, I'll give you a year's contract. If I don't like it, you're out in the street. You can't come back to this job. But if you don't want to risk it, you can stay on this job. It was pretty smart, actually, if you think about it. I had to risk everything and not play it safe. So I said, no, I'll risk it. So anyway, I did it. He liked it, and I started directing. So the only 2 things to be drawn from this is to volunteer yourself. If you find a situation to somebody who's in a position of power, to volunteer, offer your services. And secondly, to find a mentor, somebody who believes in you and will help you. And I've helped people subsequent because of that experience. There was a writer called Billy Ray who wrote a couple of films of my films, and he directed 2 films, Shattered Glass and one called, what the hell was it called? It was about a spy. What the hell was it called? I can't think of the name now, but I will think of it in a minute. Billy Ray, where is it? Somewhere in here, somewhere. It's called Breach. That's what it was called, Breach. I don't know whether you saw it, but it was a wonderful film. Anyway, he wanted to direct, and he said, what can I do? I said, well, I believe in you. I said, listen, Billy, here's what I'll do. You've written material for me. Here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to write you your dialogue when you go see those producers so that you can persuade them that you can allow you to direct your own script. So I did. I wrote the whole spiel. And he used it, and he got the job as director. So they say the thing to be drawn from all this is volunteer your talents, B, find a mentor, somebody who believes in you and will help you, because you need help in this rather complicated business that we're in. Directing for live television, that was an experience. I spoke earlier to some of the students who were kicking around, and I said to them, there was no grass, there's no hash that would give you a high like directing live television drama. Can you imagine you go and direct a show like we see on one of these programs now, live, the whole show? And I was telling them, and they used to, I always remember the moment, the 10 seconds before, 10, 9, 8, and my stomach would start churning, 7, 6. It was going all across Canada, the whole show. 5, 4, 3, 2, fade up on 1, hit the music, super the titles, kill them for Christ's sake, kill them, super the next title, go to 3, take it, go to 4, 1, bigger, and the closer, take it. And you do that for 1 hour. So by the end of the show, the adrenaline level would be up here. I'd be so high, I couldn't come down. I couldn't sleep for 2 nights. I'd be so high. And I was telling somebody a funny story. When I first did Chase and Sanborn Hour, the music we used for was Charlie Chaplin's Smile. La da 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 da. You know it. Da 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 da. So that was our theme music. So that was my first year of directing, and it was to do a show every 3 weeks. You rehearse for 2 weeks. We have a week. You rehearse for 2 weeks, 2 days in the studio, and on it went. Anyway, so it's 5, 4. Your stomach starts churning. 3, 2. Hit the music. Da 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 da. And the rest of it in madness. Dissolve. 25 years later, I'm in a restaurant having a romantic evening with a beautiful young woman, darling, drinking red wine, and my stomach starts to go, oh, hell, oh, what's the matter with me? Jesus. Keep smiling. God, stop it, for Christ's sake. I'm trying to seduce this woman. This stomach, behave yourself. But it still would refuse to, and it's churning. What do I hear in the music? La da 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 da. To this day, I'm like Pavlov's dog. When I hear that music, my stomach starts to go. Butterflies like the size of Pegasus start beating in there. But it was an amazing experience because you direct. Am I going on too long here?
No.
It was an amazing experience, live television. I mean, it was a short period of television history. Because it was great because you directed comedy, drama. To this day, that's why I still can do Weekend at Bernie's, and I can also do First Blood, and also, you did drama, you did historical plays, you did comedies, you did all sorts of things. And it was a great training ground for me as a director. But as I say, it was a very short period, live television. And then tape took over. And basically after 2 years of directing, I decided I wanted, having abandoned hopes of becoming a poet, I started directing in 1955. I've been directing for 55 years. I started directing in 1955, 56, 57. And I decided I wanted to be a film director or a theater director. I wasn't sure. So the choice was a lot of Canadian directors like Norman Jewison, Arthur Hiller, they went to Hollywood. But I wasn't sure whether I wanted to work in films or theater. Am I driving somebody out of the theater already? Somebody's leaving. I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a theater director or a film director. So I decided to go to London. Because I was a Canadian, there's no necessity for a work permit to go to London. So I went there, and I worked both in theater and in films. And films and theater got me my first film job. I directed a play written by a friend of mine called Progress to the Park. It was a comedy. And a producer of a film called Tiara Tahiti with James Mason and John Mills. Do you remember James Mason and John Mills? Well, he saw the comedy, thought that I would be a good director for it. So my first film was shot in Tahiti, believe it or not. There you go. And then after that, I did a second film with Lawrence Harvey and Gene Simmons. You're all too young, but Lawrence Harvey he died very young, 46, but he was a major director, a major actor rather. And as a result of that, very interesting thing, I think is instructive, after having directed 2 films, a friend of mine, do you remember, does everybody here know, I mean, you should know if you belong to a film society, who Michelangelo Antonioni is? Hmm? Directed all these films, you know, La Notte, La Ventura. I mean, he did English language films. He did a film called Blow Up. You ever seen Blow Up with Vanessa Redgrave and David Hemmings? And to me, he was a god, Michelangelo Antonioni. And so I think La Ventura is really a great film. And I get a phone call. The producer of the film was a man called Pierre Rouve. Now, my parents were Bulgarian. That's what Kotcheff. Kotcheff is a Bulgarian name. He was a Bulgarian, Pierre Rouve, but he had francicized his name. It was actually Rouef. But anyway, he said, I knew him. He was an art critic and a producer. He produced for Carlo Ponti. And he phoned me up and he said, Ted, I need a favor. I said, sure, what is it? He said, I want you to, we said, you know, everybody in London had heard about this film Blow Up with Vanessa Redgrave that Antonioni was making in London. And he said, I want you to come and see the film. He said, we all know, Antonioni, Carlo Ponti, and myself, we all know the film's 20 minutes too long, but we can't see the wood for the trees and we don't know what to cut. So I'd like you to see it and suggest some cuts. I said, no. He said, no, why? I said, because I know you slimy producers. You're going behind the director's back. You want me to suggest some cuts and you're going to cut the film without even asking him. Ted, you're so cynical for a man so young. I said, I'm not cynical, I'm realistic. I know you producers, I know the tricks you get up to. So he said, well, he said, if you want me to do it, Antonioni has to phone me. He said, you heard what I said, Antonioni or nothing. So 30 minutes later, Antonioni phones me and says, Ted, I loved your film, Life at the Top. It was wonderful, and I wanted someone young like you to suggest some cuts. I said, okay, for you, Michelangelo, anything. And I suggested 20 minutes of cuts, and he used 15 minutes of my cuts for that film, Blow Up. If you ever see it, I had the final cut on that film. At any rate, he said, so when he phoned me up and he thanked me very much, and then he invited me to come when I came to Rome, which I was going to because I was going to make a film for Carlo Ponti. And he wanted me to take him to dinner. So when we had dinner together, I said, Michelangelo, explain something to me about Italian films. Why are there so many writing credits on it? He said, you see, Ted, we in Italy, when I do my films, I have a writer who we write the whole, I'm not going to do his accent indefinitely. What they did, they would write the whole film as a silent film. A series of connected pictures that tell the story. And he said, you see, Ted, unlike American films, we think of dialogue as sound effects. You see a door slam, you must hear a slam. If a couple are having an argument, they have to be making some kind of noise. But the point of the scene is that they're having an argument, which leads the protagonist to the next scene to what he does. And that's what's important, not what they're saying. So I said, well, you didn't answer my question. Why you got so many writers? He said, well, I said, once I get through with my chief writer, and we write, they wrote like Blow Up. I saw the script. It was 90 pages of a silent film. He said, so now we have to make, now the actors have to make some noise, don't they? So we say, who writes great marital discord scenes? Liam O'Brien. Yeah. He writes, get him in. So he comes in and he writes all the marital discord scenes. Then they say, who shall we get to write the dialogue scenes? Well, we shall get Rebecca. Rebecca writes great love scenes. Love scenes. So that's why he said you get all these credits. But they're all just, as he said, sound effects. Yeah. But that was so great about the films, and I learned that was very formative to me after my second film that the whole point is to have the film as a visual experience and not try to tell the story as a dialogue experience. And try to tell the story. When I learned a lot from, I mean, I was very glad to be in London at the time, because even with my second film, it had a great, I was very influenced by all the European films. There was the new wave with Truffaut and the rest were all making films. And of course, Fellini was my big hero. And well, there was, for example, in Life at the Top, there was a scene where in the first, it was a sequel to Room at the Top, and Laurence Harvey had an affair with Simone Signoret, and she had died, and he goes to see the husband. So it's the husband and the lover having a scene. And this is a typical example of the difference between American and British films are schizoid. They're mostly influenced by both American and by European films. And there was a scene between the husband and the lover, and finally the husband walks away. And I had him walk away, and you realize that this was a devastating encounter and experience, and it really broke him. He was a broken man. You never see him again. You see this kind of figure retreating away from the camera. And the producer said, "Oh, we just cut the scene after he gets up." I said, "No, you gotta get this emotional quality out of the scene. Otherwise, it becomes just a narrative scene. You jump on to the next scene. No, you want to get." And we fought argument. I had a terrible argument about it. And to this day, I've forgotten now who won, him or me. But I had the music. That's a very important thing as directors, you come along. You've got to leave, which I learned at the time from my editor, who was a European editor. He said, "Ted, you must leave time for the music. Don't have dialogue on top of dialogue on top of dialogue." And that's what we do, of course, in television. It's wall-to-wall dialogue. When I first went on to Law and Order Special Victims Unit, Dick Wolf said to me, "What do you think?" I said, "God, it's wall-to-wall dialogue, Dick." He said, "Well, that's television. But you must leave time for the music. Let the composer have a chance to make a statement about the characters, about the story, and you got to give him a chance to develop his themes. And it isn't just music at the titles, and after that, it's underneath the dialogue. To leave time for the music." But so it was different. So Hollywood at the time they were the great storytellers, no question. Hollywood films at the time told stories, whereas Europeans were more interested in states of mind, emotional states. It was a whole different intention. But having that Antonioni had a big effect on my own films, that I always thought of them after that. Forget about this dialogue. Because I remember seeing his film like Il Deserto Rosso. I didn't speak Spanish. I didn't speak Italian, rather. But I understood everything in that picture because it was told visually. And, you know, I never liked the word director. Never cared for the word director. It sounds like a guy who sits on the board of a bank on Wall Street, board of directors. You know? The French have the best word for director, réalisateur, a realizer. You have the dream of a film in your head, a vision of that film, and you realize it. And so, and the whole crew are there to service your dream. The set designer, the costume designer, everybody's there to help you. You ever see a film Day for Night by Truffaut? All through the film, he's talking, people come up to him, red dress or green dress? The red dress. Do you want what's the car? The black car or the black car? He's always answering questions because he has the film in his head and he knows what he wants. And that's the most important thing if you're going to be a director, to have the whole dream in your head. I mean, the whole film, rather, as a vision in your head. When I'm working on a film, all I can think about for the 3 months leading up to it is when I'm shaving, in the bathtub, whatever it is, I keep seeing the film, and then she goes over to the fireplace. And any questions? Sorry, next question.
No, as you may have noticed, I don't have to actually ask Ted any questions. All I have to do is give a prompt, and off he goes. Two things from that. First of all, if you have not seen Blow Up, or especially the other films, you must. It's absolutely essential.
Do you know what that maniac did, Antonioni? In a green park, he had scenes in a green park of murder. He painted the leaves of the park gray.
and that this is a visual medium, you know, and story and your ability to tell brilliant stories, essential characteristic is to tell them visually, which is why here, the very first short film the students make, dialogue is prohibited. There is no dialogue. Because your job is to show us, not to tell us. I wanted to ask you about, you know, probably one of the most difficult issues, because we're talking about directors here, or realizers. I think so many people come to this thinking that the job of the director is to tell other people what to do, and to which I respond, only if you want to be hated. And if you want to be hated,
I guess a lot of people hate me.
I mean, at least advertently or directly. But I wanted to get your thinking on something else that might go into the toolkit, or that actually comes as a skill, and that is the ability to be endlessly curious about other human beings and their stories. Because I found, in many ways, what I think drives us to tell stories, drives us in the theater or in film to work with actors, is the fact that innately or somehow, by lightning striking us or something, we are innately curious about other people. I want to know how you've seen that through your life, because I think it's a major part of what we do.
Well, of course, your film has got to say something about the human experience, and you've got to put your characters. I mean, I made a note here. I did a film called Wake in Fright in Australia, which has been the most miraculous film that happened to me, miraculous event. And I said, there's a deep drive in all of us to self-knowledge, no matter how painful. We put ourselves into situations where we can encounter our real selves. So that's what you want to do. Otherwise, of course, a film should have all the classical virtues, interesting characters, interesting relationships. But it's got to make some comment, as I say, upon the human experience. When I decided I was going to be a film director, I studied acting. Not that I wanted to be an actor, but I wanted to be able to deal with actors. And one of my actors that I taught was Bill Shatner. You know who Bill Shatner is? Captain Kirk? Yes, he was one of mine. Because after I studied acting, the acting teacher had to go to England, and I took over her classes for the year, and he was one of my pupils, Bill Shatner. We became friends. And I think it's very important, to be able to speak with actors and deal with them. And each one you have to find a language for. Because they all want, some you can use psychoanalytic language, some you can use everyday language, some you can use. I remember Gene Hackman, first day when I came on, he said, Kotcheff, I only want 3 directions from you. I said, oh, what are those, Gene? More or less, louder, softer, faster, slower. More or less, louder, softer, faster. Okay. Of course, I ignored it. But you're able to communicate with actors what you want, or to stimulate them, at least. So you have to find out their idiosyncrasies and to get the best performances out of them. But of course, as Liam said, finally, you've got to bring I want you to bring your fresh vision of what life is about, what human beings should be are about, your personal vision of life. And that's what makes films interesting.
Yeah. There's an old line that goes, if you want to, if you want to send a message, go get a pulpit or something like that.
Send a telegram.
No, send a telegram, right? Yeah. But I mean, looking over your work, one thing that strikes me is somewhere in this, and it's not always obvious, is that there's a moral to the tale. Whether it's Duddy, Kravitz, or your other films, in other words, there's something truly to be learned in your films. And of course, I mean, no director wants to telegraph the message, you know, but at the same time, you want the audience to leave with some questions in their head and some eyes, and some thought that may strike them days, weeks, months, years later, but that somehow there's a message here that you go, oh wow, you know, and there's this like realization. And I think it's in all your films. I mean, everything from from the comedies to the dramas. There's always lurking back there somewhere is some really interesting, rather profound observation or statement, whether intentional or not. I'm not sure. It's there, you know, and it's probably the hardest thing to do because it's not something you can telegraph. You know?
No, that's absolutely right. No, you shouldn't. From that point of view, when I did Duddy Kravitz, I don't know how many people saw The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz with Richard Dreyfus, but that was a tricky one. Yeah. Because here you have a character who does the most unpleasant things imaginable. He cripples his friend, he forges checks, he does some really nasty stuff. And I wanted the audience to understand the network of causes that led him to behave like this. Many years ago, my big culture hero is Anton Chekhov. And he's written 13 volumes of short stories. I've read all his short stories. And in one of his letters that shocked me, sent a frisson down my backbone, was as follows. He wrote a story called The Horse Thief. And he sent it to his literary critic in Moscow, who was who he always had submitted his stuff. And his name was Savorin, that's right. And Savorin wrote back and said, it's a wonderful story, but Anton, you take no moral stance on the question of stealing of horses. And he wrote back and said, if you need me to tell you that stealing horses is wrong, your moral structure is very feeble indeed. Right. He said, you see, what interests me is the mind of the horse thief. What's going on? How does he see the world? What makes him do what he does? And then came these two sentences that sent an electric shock through me. I'm talking to you, darling. The two sentences that sent me a shock through me were, you see, I'm not the judge of my characters. I'm their best witness. What a great line. I'm not the judge of my characters. I'm their best witness. And that led me to my whole treatment of the script of Duddy Kravitz. I'm not Duddy Kravitz's judge. You're the judge. I'm his best witness. I give all the shaping influences that made him what he was. But yes, you got it. I mean, you have to have some view of the moral structure of the universe back of your head when you work. And whatever you feel the human experience adds up to, and what human beings should be like and what they should be doing. Yeah, so there's inevitably, Liam, these come into operation in your work.
It's okay to have a point of view. And to tell a good story.
And what?
And to tell a good story.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we've been kind of going on here for 45 minutes, and you've been listening to us talk about, you know, older work. You guys probably have, you know, some questions about, you know, about more modern work, or scenes, or Law and Order, probably specifically, since I'm sure that's what you're most familiar with. You know, you probably also have some questions, you know, and how in the world do you gain access, you know, to this world, you know? And Ted's giving you some really good ideas here. It's absolutely important to take risks, not say no, volunteer, listen, learn, do anything. because these are all things that go into the toolkit that you have to have. And there's another one, I think, too, and that's something to do with humility and being absolutely open to the thoughts of other people and not feeling that you need to have a loud voice, especially early. Though you may need a loud voice. You may need a loud voice later. So I welcome you all to either stand up and shout out a question or go to the microphone over there. Or let's see if you guys have gotten some thoughts in your head that you'd like to, questions you'd like to ask. Don't be shy. Stand up, Sean, and say hi. Yeah.
Hi.
Loud.
Hi. So I asked this question of Alan Taylor because he was in a similar boat when he came here. You directed a number of different genres, and clearly, especially with Law and Order, especially as time changes, the style changes, the characters change, different scenarios. How do you put yourself from one genre into the next, and how do you differentiate your directing in any particular ways? Is there something you do, or do you try to fit the roles of similar directors, or do you just do your own thing and wing it?
Ooh, there's a question.
There's a question.
How do I go from one genre to another, you mean? Pretty much. Pretty much what you're saying to me? Well, you know, it's, as I said, I think what happened was I've directed comedies, dramas, and everything, you know. But as I said, it was partially as a result of my upbringing in the business. As I told you, in the early days, you had to do a play every 3 weeks. I was exhausted at the end of each year, you know. But you did every conceivable genre. You just expected to do it, you know. So you did it. And of course, I love film. I mean, I love comedy, and I love making. I mean, the easiest thing to direct is action. I could teach all of you in 15 minutes how to do First Blood. You think it's a joke? No. Action is easy. Drama's the next thing. Comedy is difficult. Comedy is the most difficult thing. And so you have to be very careful, especially when you're doing, I mean, very interesting. You know, I did a film called Fun with Dick and Jane with Jane Fonda and George Segal. They made a remake of it with, who was the funny Canadian? Huh?
Jim Carrey.
Jim Carrey. They made
T. Leone, I think.
Now, and he screwed it up. And why he screwed it up is, when you direct comedy, you've got to say, what am I doing here? Am I directing a farce? Is this a character comedy? Is this a social comedy? And I intended, you know, Fun with Dick and Jane to be a social comedy. It was about, and when I made it, there was a recession like there was now, and people being fired, losing their jobs. And I thought it was a funny idea to have somebody who's committing crimes in order not to survive, but, as George Bernard Shaw would have written, but to maintain their class. He was upper middle class, and he wasn't going to surrender his class, not go down in class. But you can't suddenly degenerate into farce. Jim Carrey, here he is, he's the vice president of an aerospace firm, and he has a funny sequence where he's being chased down a spiral staircase by empty water bottles. Well, that's very nice, but it's inappropriate. Now you're jumping from social comedy to farce. And comedy is so hard because you need a kind of a context in which the jokes can exist naturally and not jump out. It can't be like a cake with raisins and cherries and you see them all. It's got to be seamless and kind of without undifferentiated, the texture of it. And so it's very, very hard. But I like comedy. I love comedy, and I grew up on comedy. You know, the great thing about, as a child, my father was obsessed with films. I grew up, I was born in 1931, and my father and my mother used to go, there was no television, they used to go to the movies 3 times a week. Double features. I've seen every film that was made in the 30s and the 40s. Every film made in Hollywood. I used to see 6 films a week. And I saw comedies, I saw dramas, I saw action, I saw gangster, I saw westerns. And so it was a natural thing for me to move easily from one to the other. I directed a western that not many people saw with Gregory Peck. It was called Billy Two Hats. I shot it in Israel. Gregory Peck, now, he was very interesting. He was what a terrific man. I'll tell you a story about him. 2 weeks before shooting in Israel, late at night, I'm working at midnight with the producer, Pat Palmer, and there's a knock on the door. And I said, come in. We were in the production offices working late, and these two guys are standing there. They're straight from Central Casting. You know that they're secret agents. You know, they had sunglasses on at midnight. So I said to them, come in. They said, Mr. Kotcheff? I said, yeah, and this is Mr. Palmer. And I said, you're from the Mossad, aren't you? He said, how did you know? And I said, what's up, boys? He said, well, you know, we have secret intelligence that there's going to be an attempt by the Arab terrorists on Gregory Peck's life. He's the first Hollywood star since Kirk Douglas 30 years previously and Take a Giant Leap, or whatever it was called, or a Giant Shadow, to come to Israel. And we have serious intelligence information that they're going to try to kill him. Oh, shit, man, you know. So, like, you know, you need, right? 2 weeks before shooting. So I said, well, what do you propose? He said, well, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to give you the best man we got. His name is Harry something. I forgot Harry's last name. And he'll take the bullet. He'll stand in front. This guy had been chained to Eichmann for 6 months during the trial of Eichmann in Israel because they thought that some crazy ex-concentration camp person was going to make an attempt on Eichmann's life. They wanted him to be judicially condemned to death, not assassinated by it. So this guy had been handcuffed to Eichmann for 6 months. So he said he will take the bullet. So I said, okay, and they left. So Pat, I reach for the phone, I start dialing Beverly Hills. And Pat Palmer says, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to phone Gregory. You'll do nothing of the kind. I say, what are you talking about? It's his life, and there's no film that's worth the finger, my baby finger. What are you talking about? It's his life. I'm not going to hide it from him. That might be the thing. He said, I'm ordering you as the producer and a representative of United Artists. You're not to phone him, you know? And I said, Pat, it's somebody's life. Okay, do you want to take that position? He said, don't you phone him. So anyway, I meet Harry, and Harry, these are the joys of filmmaking. Harry arrives. Now, if Harry was standing right here, all of you would say, there was these two guys. There was Liam and Ted on the stage. He was like invisible. He'd go right into the wallpaper. And he was a sweet man, but I used to say to people, when Harry walks into a room, you feel that someone has left. And then I always rehearse, by the way, when I do a film. I have a week's rehearsal. You go through the text to see, because I don't like wasting shooting time discussing whether some line isn't working, and then I rewrite the script and able to get it all right. And I don't stage. Sometimes I will stage a scene during rehearsals. Most of the time we sit around a table and discuss it, see how the dialogue works, et cetera, et cetera. So I had Gregory Peck arrive a week before shooting. And I said, Gregory, I'm a bit behind with my production. I got to go to see some guy for horses, and I said, would you like to take a couple of days and just 2 or 3 days and just go around having, you know, sightseeing, go to Jerusalem, go to the Via Doloroso, the Wailing Wall, etc. He said, sure, I'd love to. I'm anxious to see Jerusalem. So I said, well, I have this chauffeur here for you who'll be looking after you and driving you everywhere. I said, oh, great. So so off they go, and at the end of the first day, they come back, and I said, how's Harry? Oh, he said, Harry is wonderful, so attentive, always by my side. And he said, and I said, you know, when I order at lunchtime, I ordered a food, and he went in the kitchen to see how it was cooked properly. What he was doing, of course, was testing it to see if it was poison. So I said, oh, that's great, Gregory. And so the second day, the same thing. He loved it. Third day, he came in absolutely furious. He said, why didn't you tell me that Harry, he's not my chauffeur, he's my bodyguard. And he's going to take the bullet for me. So I said, oh? What made you say that, Gregory? He said, I'm walking through the back streets into the Arab quarter of Jerusalem, he said, and a little girl, 10-year-old girl, walks up to me with a bouquet of flowers. And she offered up, and of course that was the traditional way of assassinating somebody in the days. You hit a gun in the flowers, and you offered the flowers, and the person is open, and you blew them away when you got close. So he said, little girl offered me these flowers, and Harry went, pwack! Knocked her over, went through all the flowers to find if there was a gun. He said, that's how I found out. And he said to me, why didn't you tell me? And I said, well, I'm worried that... He said, you think I'm an idiot, Ted? You think when I was sitting in back comfortably in my living room at Beverly Hills that I didn't think that someone would try to kill me? That some Arab would want to shoot me to make publicity? And I said, Jesus, Gregory, you're exactly like somebody out of a film. He had I said, the guts and the courage. That was him. He had the moral fiber, and he was a wonderful man. But he had lots of peccadillos. He was used to, as an actor, you couldn't forget about the first 7 takes. It would take 7 takes for him to warm up. And finally around take 15. And he used to love the Hollywood directors. They'd take him up to take 35 all the time. And the other thing, so he always knew that you were in for a lot of takes. Secondly, you could never have a stranger. I had a stranger once, a publicity guy came onto the set. I didn't know that. And Gregory caught the guy out of the corner of his eyes, and he fumbled his lines. And then we did another take, and he fumbled his lines again. That was not characteristic of him. And he kept fumbling his lines. I said, finally I said, Gregory, why don't you go back to your hotel, and I'll shoot something else today. So I sent him off. And that night I had dinner. I said, Gregory, you've been making films for 30 years. What happened today? He said, well, you know, Ted, I get nervous. When I see a stranger on the set, I get nervous, and I fumble the line. And then having fumbled the line, I say to myself, here's this guy. He says, there's that big star, Gregory Peck, being paid all that money. Look at him. He can't even say a line straight. So I fumble the line again. And then, now I think, this guy really thinks I'm a bad actor, and I fumbled my line again. I said, I get it. So I always had, no one was allowed on the set when he was working, because, so each actor has to be treated to find a way to deal with him and communicate with him. And now I taught the Chekhov method, Anton Chekhov had a nephew, Mikhail Chekhov, who worked with Stanislavski. Right. And that was the method that I taught. Mikhail Chekhov method when I was 24, 25. And it's a great technique. And Gregory had written the introduction to Mikhail Chekhov's book. So he and I used Mikhail Chekhov in our language of communicating what I wanted him to do. So it's on each, you had to find, for each actor, you have to find a special language to get through to him, and so you can communicate to him the subtleties that you're looking for. What am I going on here, Bob? Is that not...
No, but it's absolutely true, because every actor is a different skill set. I mean, that you have.
I didn't answer your question, I know. But it's very different going. But I don't have any problems. I love doing comedy, and I love doing action. I love all those things. So I must tell you, never found it difficult to answer, going from one genre to another. But a lot of people specialize, And some people don't talk to actors at all. Right. Steven Spielberg has never talked to an actor in his life. Never said one word to an actor. And and often, right now, like at NBC, they say, oh, that director, is he a shooter or an actor's director? Huh?
Right.
I want him to be both. I want him to be able to work with his actors and get performances. At the same time, I want him to be able to, he knows how to use the camera to get the most out of the performance. But, so I never had any problems in that regard. So I find your question difficult to answer, because it seemed to be, I move very easily from one to the other. But some people specialize in one or the other, And some people just stick away from comedy because it's too difficult.
Right.
You know, the old Oscar Wilde story, he's dying, and somebody says to him, Oscar, God, you're dying. It must be so difficult. He says, dying? It's easy. Comedy, that's difficult.
Comedy, that's hard.
Anyway, sorry. But
a question, yes.
How are you? Big fan of First Blood. These guys will tell you. Big fan of First Blood.
Oh, good, thank you. Yeah.
How was it like working with Sylvester Stallone?
Well, Sylvester is very guarded. He's been kicked around. He told me horrible stories, like he was in that picture, that film, what was it called? Entertaining Mr. Sloan? No, he was in that picture where a girl goes to a bar, woman goes to a bar. What's her name? The actress. Looking Mr. Goodbar.
Looking for Mr. Goodbar.
Looking for Mr. Goodbar. And he told me the story like he had to get naked in bed with, what was the star? What's her name?
Diane Keaton.
Diane Keaton, right. And he had to get in bed with Diane Keaton. And it's also, you know, for a lot of actors, it's very embarrassing. You know, you have to get in and pretend you're naked, and you're naked. And the producer walked in and said to the director, talking over the bed, the Stallone's in the bed, it's like, where did you find this animal? She wouldn't go to bed with this animal. Get this animal out of here. That was his first encounter with Hulk. So a lot of actors get kicked around from pillar to post, of course. When they get to be big stars, they start doing the kicking. Right. But he himself, he had a very mixed career. When I did First Blood, he had his 3 Rockies were successful that he had done, but Fist, Cobra, Nighthawk, Paradise Alley, all flops. So the received wisdom in Hollywood at the time was that he Sylvester Stallone only works in Rocky. And in fact, Warner Brothers, when we finished the film, they wouldn't even look at the film. They said, no, he only works. They wouldn't even look at the film because he was in it. So he knew that, and so he was very uptight. And I was, you know, relatively unknown in terms of directing action. You know, I'd done these small Canadian films, Duddy, Kravitz, etc., but this was the first big action film. So he felt his career was in a parlous state and a very funny thing, and I'm putting my whole career in the hands of this schmuck Bulgarian. What's he doing? You know, I don't know. Can I trust him? So he was the walls were up. Then, but the 3rd week of shooting, there's a scene, if you look at the film, there's a scene where they had a fraction of it where the deputy, he's hanging at the side of the wall and the deputy's firing at him. Oh yes, remember that? And that deputy. And he falls out of the helicopter, and he falls on a rock. It's splat and dies. It's the only death in the picture, actually. And the blood's all over the rock. So he runs over and he's freezing to get his tunic. That's all he wants. And when he arrives, so I said to him, at this point, Sylvester, I want you to, when you see this dead body, going through your heart, your soul, your brain, your eyes, every dead body that you saw in Vietnam, with the Viet Cong, Americans, every dead body, every death you witnessed, I want to see it in your face. He said, okay. And he did it, and he did it brilliantly. The next night, we screened dailies at a small theater. We shot this film up in northern British Columbia in a small town called Hope. We used to call it No Hope, British Columbia. But and this close-up of him came up. So he walked over to me and he said, because we always sat separate from everybody else. He never looked at dailies sitting next to him. He sat all by himself, and he walked over and he said, you know, Ted, that moment when I see that body, that's the finest bit of acting I've ever done, and I owe it all to you. And he walked away from me. And from that moment on, I could have asked him to stand on his head, pull out his penis, and quote from the Bible, and he would have done it. But you know, so we got along very well, and he had what great thing about, we worked on the script together. I had written the first 2 or 3 drafts, and we worked together on it. And one thing about him, he has a great populist sense. He knows what audiences like and what they don't like. So he made two great contributions, but the great contribution he made, that whole picture was a suicide mission. That when he goes back comes back, remember the sheriff dumps him out of the town, and he says, screw this, I'm going back into town. He knows, he feels, I don't belong in this country. They hate me. They hate all Vietnam veterans. And I don't belong here anymore, and I don't care, I'm going to die. I'm going back in there. And I'll probably die. So we conceived of it as a suicide mission. And at the end of the picture, you bored, ladies? At the end of the picture, he says to the colonel, I know why you've come in here. You got a gun underneath your tunic, and you're going to kill me, aren't you? And Richard Crenna pulls out the gun. And he can't do it. He can't shoot him. And Rambo grabs it, pushes the trigger, and blows himself away. He commits suicide. And he bangs up against it. And that was the end of the picture. He died. So Sylvester Stallone comes over to me and he says, you know, Ted, this was towards the end of the shooting, we've put this guy through so much, Rambo. He was chased, he's shot at it. He has to sew himself up, and he's, and it's freezing. He jumps off a cliff into the trees, and now we kill him. The audience are going to hate us. They're going to hate us. I said, but okay. I said, well, maybe you got a point, Sylvester. And he said, do you really want to come back here 3 months from now, when the distributor says you can't kill Rambo and have to reshoot the ending? And I said, okay, I got an idea. I know exactly how to do it. We'll cut off that scene before he pulls the gun out, and I'll cut outside, and you'll come outside with the colonel. And I had that long shot. I did it one shot. It goes down out of the side of the police station. They come down the steps, and you go over, and you see the sheriff being put into an ambulance. You know that he hasn't died. He's still in. And they walk down the street with the whole town watching. And he gets into a Jeep and he drives off, and that's the end. And I did it in one shot. But the producer said, "Why are you doing this? You're wasting money. You're wasting time." And I said, "Just give up." And he said, "We want the ending as it's." He dies at the end. Well, it was amazing. Most producers would have wanted the other way around. And anyway, that was the way the picture came out. We finished it all. And Orion, of course, were beside themselves. She says, "Hey, you can't kill Rocky." And then you always have, films are always tested at cinemas. And they always take you somewhere, Colorado or somewhere. In this case, we went to some suburb in Las Vegas and some multiplex. And the audience came in and they're all given cards, and you knew they loved that film. I've never seen an audience like that. This is typical of audience. They were screaming at the screen, "Get him! Get him!" People yelling out and waving their fists. And then when he pulled and committed Harry at the end, you could have heard a pin drop in the theater. And a voice said, "If the director of this film is in this theater, he should be taken out and hung from the next lamppost." So I said to my wife, "Let's get out of here before they lynch me." So the cards came in, and of course all the kids said, "Oh, this is the best action film I've ever seen, but the ending." And all the cards said the same thing. So the producers looked at all these cards, and I said, "Well, boys, in my back pocket, I just happen to have this other ending." And that was the ending that was shown. But he was, it's a long-winded answer to your question. Yeah. But he was so he was a big help, in terms of that. He smelled what you should sometimes, the right thing to do, and the wrong thing to do. But after that moment that he came over to me and complimented me on getting this performance out of him. It was pie, easy as pie.
We have time for another question or two, but go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Kotcheff, Pat Morrow. Thank you very much for being with us here tonight. I wanted to ask you, I know that your career kind of flip-flopped from like theater to TV to film to theater, back to film to theater and so forth. What is your view on like the market today and kind of how because I know that it's not like that today. So if you have any advice or any thoughts on that process, we'd be glad to hear.
On the situation today? Well, I know I screened a film, one of my best films I made in Australia, called Wake in Fright. And it was at the Cannes Festival in '71. It was just declared a Cannes Classic and was screened at the last Cannes. Martin Scorsese was the guy who declared it to be a Cannes Classic. And there was somebody who was at one of these film festivals. It went to every film festival, the AFI Film Festival, Palm Springs, everywhere. And somebody was sitting next to me, and he said, nobody would let you make this film today. And I found it rather depressing. And it's true that I know I have some material that's difficult material, and it's very difficult, especially with a recession, because the banks are not lending independent producers any money. So, and the kind of films that at least I want to make, and probably you want to make, are not, I mean, you don't want to make those big comic strip films, or those, at least I don't. I couldn't be interested in them. And the kind of films that I'd want to make, it's very difficult, even with all my experience, to get the financing for them. But you have to just keep working at it, you know. I mean, the most often question I get asked is, how do you get to make a film? Well, there's many ways. As the Bulgarians say, there's many roads to the top of the mountain. And I always say the best thing to do is to write a good script, and then you get someone, a financier, to look at it and say, well, I like it. If you're going to want to make this film, I want to direct it. And that's a very, but there are other ways, via editing, via actors, and to get to direct a film. But it's very difficult right now, I must say.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, it's all about story, because at the end of the day, if it isn't bankrollable, it's not going to get made. And the better story you have, the better chance you have.
Some of the best films I've seen have been black and white.
What did you say?
So the best films are in black and white.
But I can't get my kids to sit down and watch those black and whites with me. They only want to see color films. And I'm saying, this is a good movie, but they only want to see color. Is the future, or what do you think the future is animation, and then kids won't want to see color anymore? They want to see the animated film.
No, I don't think that. But you know, I made one black and white film, Life at the Top, because it was a sequel to Room at the Top, and Room at the Top was a black and white film. So I had terrible arguments about, you know, I said I don't want to make a black and white film. Audiences don't want to look at black and white anymore. Then there was, you remember the colorization argument? I think it was one of the networks, maybe it was Turner.
Wasn't it Ted Turner?
Turner? Yeah. They were going to colorize all black and white films when they showed them, because it was, you were right, nobody wanted to watch a black and white film on television. So and of course I think it was Martin Scorsese or somebody, I think it was Martin, who led the way and fought this thing. He said, no, you're violating the director's rights. He shot it in black and white, and so the DGA stopped them from colorizing black and white films. And you're right, the people right now, they won't even put them on television, black and white films, you know. But as to the future, I doubt whether, I mean, certainly there's more and more cartoon films being made for young people to go and see. But I think that there's always going to be people like yourselves, you know, there's always going to be an audience for a film, an adult film. And it'll be in color, I think.
Hi. So I've always been more interested in TV, dramas, so my question is, whenever I talk to anybody, they always think that Law and Order SVU is the best Law and Order. That most people are more inclined to watch this instead of.
Is that your question?
Well, kind of actually. What do you think it is? You know, I mean, because time slots have been changed. You know, there's been actors in and out. Besides Mariska Hargitay, why do you think SVU has been more successful among the other Law and Orders, and even among other TV?
Because I got involved with it. No, I'll tell you what I think. Seriously. First of all, I think Mariska Hargitay is. We have a tremendous following amongst young women because she's a template for the kind, they want to be her, and she's a template for the kind of woman they want to be. Because within her character, she's a tough professional cop, but not at the expense of her feminine capacity for empathy and compassion. So she has the best of the masculine qualities and the best of feminine qualities and fuse them together. And the women want to be like that. They want to be professional, they want to be make it in a man's world, as she does. She's all, she thinks she's the only woman except for the ADA, but she's surrounded by male cops. The other series were all, the two cops were always men. If you think about it, how many men and women were, but it's because I think of her. And I know it's a fact because we get tremendous number of emails from young women saying, how much they want to be like her. And I think, it was the other question, when I first got the job, I got it, I was going to do a big film about Hitler. And I worked on it for a year and a half. I had John Briley, who won an Academy Award for Gandhi on the script, and we had a great script, but they finally didn't want to make this film because it showed Hitler as a human being. Anyway, they wanted to show him as a devil. I said, yeah, but he was a human being, unfortunately. He looked like one. But he was a snake, but he looked like a human being. Anyway, and it fell through after about a year and a half of working the script. They spent $5 million on pre-production. Anyway, and when I was offered this, my agent said, Dick Wolf's very interested in you running this new series called Sex Crimes. I said, didn't interest it. He said, just talk to him. So I did talk to him, make a long story short. And my wife said to me about episode 4 or 5, she said, what do you think? And I said, this won't make it until episode 13. And she said, why? I said, it's because it's so easily could turn into rape of the week or child molestation of the week. So I said, so when Neil Baer came over from ER, I hired him from ER to come over. I said, look, we got to figure out a way to get some longevity out of this. And he was very good. And we discussed, I said, let's take this whole thing into areas of social concern. The things that are going around our society all the time. It's very interesting. So I think that's another reason why we had longevity. Because it's very interesting today. I was down and getting some therapy done on this bruised bone here. And I was watching CNN. We're doing an episode about women, college women being raped. These crazy idiots over here at Yale, they hang a banner out in the front of their fraternity. It was Delta Kappa Epsilon. And it said, no means yes, yes means fuck. This is what they hung out in front, these idiots. Well, you can imagine what happened. Yale, everybody went mad. And they made them rip it down. They closed the fraternity. But so there it is. And meanwhile, I'm in the middle of dealing with, 1/3 supposedly statistically, 1/3 of women in college will be raped in the course of their university careers. So, it's a small example, but we did sometimes non-sexual things, gun violence we dealt with, all sorts of things. And I wanted always to deal something the audience would be interested in. It was happening, politically, sociologically, emotionally. So it wasn't always about another rape or another molestation of a child.
Ted, you, beyond broadening story, you gave me just an incredible statistic tonight at dinner, which has to do with the number of actors that you've auditioned. Could you just give out the figure?
I felt I was getting Alzheimer's because I was forgetting people's names, and my assistant, she had nothing better to do. We have taped every audition since we started 12 years ago. Every audition, when we first started, for all the main parts, because I auditioned Mariska Hargitay and Chris Maloney and a lot of other actors. And for every episode, we have about 35, 40, maybe 50, sometimes more characters, and so the auditions. So I guess she had nothing better to do, and she came in one day and said, "Ted, do you know how many actors you've auditioned since we started Law & Order SVU?" I said, "No." She said, 26,000. I said, "You're kidding me." She said, "No, I counted them all up. You auditioned 26,000 actors." So no wonder I forget all their names. Yes, what?
I was wondering if you could just tell the audience about your experience hiring women directors and what made you decide to do that.
Well, you know, the other horrible statistic is, for women anyway, is when I took this this job on, I thought, first of all, I said we should get women writers, and I should get women directors. After all, sexual crimes are predominantly committed against women, and women are involved with with their children who are molested. So I went to the DJ and I said, "Could you give me a list of the women directors that you have?" He said, "Ted, we have." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Women only make up 8% of the directorial membership of the DGA. 92% are male, 8% are female." I said, "This is the disgrace." I said, "Come on, you know." So it sounds so. I didn't want to bring it up. It sounds a bit self-congratulatory, but I wanted to use women, and I hire women all the time, because I think and it was very difficult to find women at all, because they were not used very often, so they never had a chance to develop themselves, to develop their talents. You got to work to develop yourself. You can't just, you know. And so sometimes I'd bring women on and they'd make a balls up of it, and I'd have to step in and help them, you know, go through it. But now I got like Helen Shaver. She's an actress. I mean, that's another way of getting in, as I told you earlier, to become a director. She was, I don't know whether you know Helen Shaver is an actress. She's terrific. She was in a film with Paul Newman and others. Now she's become a wonderful director, and I use her now. She does 3 or 4 episodes for me. I use, there are women that, I think Rebecca asked me, where do the women come from besides acting? There was one woman I've used that was a script supervisor. So there was one woman I used who came, it was Leslie Glatter. Leslie Glatter I hired. She was great. Episode 2. We're up to 260. Episode 2, I hired a director. She was named Leslie Glatter. And one of the difficulties of my show is you have scenes in the police headquarters, in the squad room, where 6 people, they're all talking to each other. And shooting them is a nightmare for the eye lines, for who's talking to whom and how do you do it. Leslie Glatter, in episode 2, she was a choreographer. She choreographed these scenes in the squad room, and I use them to this day. I say, you want to see how it's done? Look at the way Leslie Glatter did it. She was, and so I want to keep developing and using women, because I think it's ridiculous that only 8% of the DGA are female.
Okay, one more question. Oh my gosh, look at all these hands. We'll be here for, go on, yes, go ahead. Let's go way to the back. I've been favoring the front.
I give them 2, 3 more questions.
I'll give them 2 or 3, go ahead.
I'll try to keep my answers short.
All right, that's time. Anyway, has there ever been a story idea that was too gruesome or too despicable to show on TV, and if so?
On television?
Yeah, for SVU. Was there any story that someone said that you just thought was too bad to show, and if so, what was it?
Well, no, to answer your question, not been too horrible, but I just found a lot of them incredible. There was one story, you know what we used to do? We used to have a person, all they did was to go through all the newspapers and magazines, and anything to do that was in our in our area of dramatic examination would cut it out. And as you know, there's 4 rapes a day in New York, you know what I mean? So we had a telephone directory. So that thick, she'd cut it out, stick it on a page, and we'd put it in. So when the writer says, oh, Ted, I don't know what to write about. Well, let's go through the telephone directory. And say, what about this? Oh, there's this dentist who gasses his women, and when they're under, he rapes them on the dentist's chair. No, we're going to do it. So going. And there was one that he said, oh, I like this one. And what is it? There was a guy, if you believe this one, he raped 9 women 9 times on a crowded subway train, packed at rush hour. I said, no one's going to believe this. No, I don't want to do this. No one's going to believe this. And he said, no, it'd be great, Ted. And I said, and finally I said, well, I think the audience they're not going to believe it. It ain't going to work. It didn't work. It never did work. And what happened, the police would say to the, what he did was, he went up to a woman, he'd stalk her for 2 days, and then he'd get on the subway train at rush hour at 5 o'clock. And as we're coming in, he'd walk up to her and saying, I have a box cutter in my hand. If you yell and scream, I'm going to cut your throat and kill you. So then he'd push her on the floor. I wouldn't have it on the floor. I put him at least standing up against the side at the back. On the floor of the subway train, he raped the women. And as he came to the subway station, he'd run off into the station. He did it successfully 9 times. And the police would say, why didn't you do something on your people? The only person, the old lady, started hitting the guy in the back with their umbrella. And they said, we thought there were a couple of disgusting hippies screwing on the floor. You know. He got away with it 9 times, and then he stopped. And we don't know why, nobody knew why he stopped. And you know how he was caught? Of course, they had his DNA, right? 9 times. He's driving to Mexico to get away. I think he's going to get caught. He's driving through Virginia, and he's speeding through Virginia. He gets pulled over by a cop. Virginia is the only state in the 50 United States that takes your DNA for speeding.
Oh, God.
They took his DNA, and of course, the computer practically blew up. And they caught him. But I said, no. So to answer your question, never too horrible, but some of them are so unbelievable. So the stories, we did it, but I never liked it very much, and I don't think it worked. But horrible, well, you have to be careful, I think. Sometimes, and NBC has very strict rules about what you show and what you don't show. If you notice, sometimes it's always, I try keep a very strict, I'm a big believer in point of view. You got to tell the story from someone's point of view. When I did North Dallas 40, it was Nick Nolte's point of view. It was easy to cut inside the owner's office and say, that Nick Nolte, you know, he's a bad apple and he's spoiling all the other players. Let's get rid of him. But we got to do it somehow so we don't have to pay him off. But I never could have that. So I wrote that script. I wrote North Dallas 40. I kept a strict point of view. And we do that in our story. You never, except for the teaser, you never see anything that they don't see, that Rishka and that one of our detectives, 2 of our detectives see. I never break point of view. So that keeps it, even the most distasteful things, you never see it because they never saw it, except they see the after effects, right? Sorry, some other questions, sir. Yep.
Thanks for coming here. I just had a question. I've seen many behind-the-scenes interviews of directors, and they always talk about how sometimes they're bogged down by the production process and how it's either it's producer pressure or pressures of on-set working. They feel robbed of the ideals that when they got into like independent filmmaking. I was just wondering if you could talk about how you combat that, either being like producer pressure or anything, to make the film that you want to make and not the film that producers want you to make.
Well, I think you just got to fight for the integrity of your film, you know. You got to stick up for it. It's funny, it's years ago, after I did Life at the Top, there was a guy called Julius Epstein who wrote Casablanca. Right. And he came to a dinner afterwards screening. He said, it's a wonderful film, Ted. You're going to be a wonderful director. And he said, I'm sure you're going to fight for the integrity of your subject and never let anybody interfere with. He said, but there's two areas, don't bother arguing with the distribution company. He said, titles and endings. Anyway, but to answer your question, first of all, you try to work with sympathetic producers. You know, I made Duddy, Kravitz, and I made a guy called Robert Lantos, a Canadian producer. And he was great. He's very intelligent and always made intelligent suggestions. But if for any second I demurred from what he said, he'd back off immediately and say, oh, Ted, I'm just suggesting. If you don't like it, don't do it. And most producers now don't try to have a pissing contest anymore. And also, and a lot of distribution companies don't want to interfere with your work by cutting behind your back, the thing that's talked about earlier. You know, MGM had that awful man called James Aubrey, who ran it for many years. He wrecked that company. You know why? Because he was always re-editing the film after you submitted it. He would recut the whole film. And so as a result, no one would go there. No decent director would go to MGM. It wrecked that company. That's why it's a shell of its former self. So I'm not going to go there. That'd be the bottom of your list. You'd have to be really desperate to go to MGM to finance your film, because you knew that they were going to butcher it. And so no decent director would go. And the same with the producer. The producer gets a bad rap as a guy who interferes with you. Then no one wants to work with him. No decent director will work with him. And I, as a director, I hate people interfering with me. You know, and I'm temperamental too, and I scream and yell. So, but I fight for the integrity of my film. I think it's always a problem. But on the whole now, people don't do that. Anybody else?
Once again, thanks for being here. What is the best advice to the women in the business, since there are so few of us? What is your best advice for us to be able to get in there, get our niche in there? Because I know it is a man's world out there, and I really hope something will be out there for me to grab.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, you know, I guess there are people like me who want to hire women, and I think, and then, you know, what's his name's daughter? Huh? What? Yes. Yeah, his daughter. I mean, there are women, and I think it's to, as I said, write a good script and say you want to direct it. And I think there are people now who will be sympathetic to you. But it's tricky, no question about it. It's tricky, but certainly in television now, there's a lot of women coming on, darling, a lot, and because of people. I'm not the only person who's hiring women, you know, realizing that they are good. I mean, there's Laura Innes who works on ER all the time. She's brilliant. There's one of my best friends is a director called Mimi Leader. Do you know Mimi Leader? She did Deep Impact. She did a piece. What was it called? Peacemaker, with Clooney. And she did and she worked in television. She was on ER. She's a wonderful director, a wonderful woman. She's my wife's best friend. So there are a lot of women coming on, and you've got to just. I mean, if you work in television, it's hard. It's easier to work in television and get gigs than feature films where there's a lot more money at stake. But if you want you to write a good script, and you'll find somebody who will help you. You say, listen, if you want the script, I want to direct it.
That's right. Have something they want.
That's right.
That you won't surrender.
And what are other good directions for young women to work their way up? Where would you notice a woman and say, oh, I think she should now direct?
Well, I think that the most obvious showcase is television. Rebecca?
First AD, camera operator?
Well, how to start? Yeah, I see what you're saying is. Well, as I said, there's many roads to the top of the mountain, and one of them is going through Like Peter Lido, one of my directors that I'm using quite a bit, he started as an AD, second AD, then he was first AD. And then I made him a producer, and then next thing he said he wanted to direct, and I helped him, and I mentored him. I started teaching him how to direct, and he's become a wonderful director. So, so television, I said script supervisor. This girl was a very good script supervisor, and I thought she had an eye, and so I gave her a chance, right? So I think television is a very, very good. And you can move sideways into films after that when you can show what you can do. To jump right in and direct a film is possible, but it's harder. Anybody else want to ask a question?
I don't know how much time we have, that's kind of broad. I was wondering if you have any advice for aspects of...
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, sir.
Any advice for aspects of story development which would be more likely to manifest on screen more better, or for what people want more of the industry? More towards story development, I guess, generally.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
What kind of stories?
Huh?
What kind of stories or story elements do you look for? Is that what you're asking?
What kind of stories do you look for in television?
Yeah, stories and story elements. I think that's what he was saying.
Say general aspects of story development.
General aspects of story developing. That's what he was asking.
Oh dear. That's a tough one. Well, you look for something that's fresh and different. Right. You know, we've been doing it for 12 years, and what I don't want is imitations of things which we've done already. If you bring a fresh viewpoint, I mean, I get scripts sent to me a lot, and I'm afraid unsolicited scripts are very difficult. You have to send unless it's submitted by an agent or a show business lawyer, you have to send a legal form, not sue me. I've been sued twice. Right. So NBC will not allow me to receive unsolicited scripts without a legal thing. You won't sue me if there's something small in your script which then appears on the show. But you know, my friend Bob Kaufman, he directed many films. Freebie and the Bean, he's gone now. I Love My Wife, Divorce, American Style. He wrote many films. And I said to him, how did you get started? And I forget, there was a TV show that had been on for 5 years, like mine. And by this time, people were getting desperate for subject matter. So if you can get something fresh and different, and you submit it with, then the guy called him in to discuss it.
The old saw is, what they really, really want is the same but different.
That's right.
Which means it has to be genre. Oh, we understand this, but the take has to be unique.
That sounds good.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to please thank Ted.